So when you start leveraging podcasting for your business, of course you want to experience growth. That's what we're doing this for. We want our show to grow. We want the show to open up new opportunities. But the important thing to realize is that there are multiple forms of growth. And I've talked about this ad nauseum. I think a lot of times growth gets lumped in with download metrics. And if you don't see a significant number of downloads, well, then you're just not growing. At least that's the mindset. And I know I've worked with companies that wanted to see statistics, and that was the first thing they asked. And it's like, no, like let's curb that for a minute and let's talk about what growth really means. In the same breath, there are a number of things that you can do wrong out of the gates that can cost you significant growth with your podcast. No matter how you're leveraging the medium and utilizing podcasting, there are things that you could put in place that will serve as obstacles, and that could prevent you from experiencing the growth that you're looking to achieve. Now, if you've listened to past episodes before, you know when I think about growth, I'm thinking about the growth of your business and how podcasting supports that versus the growth of your podcast. But at the same time, they can work hand in hand. And I do not want you to make mistakes with this medium that are going to prevent you from growing your business. So let's talk about 4 mistakes that podcasters make that cost them years of growth. Hello, my name is Jason Sircone, and you are tuned into episode 108 of Podcasting Strategy Simplified. So 4 is just the number that I landed on. I probably could have done 14, 24. I mean, there's a number of things that you can do wrong, and I don't blame you. Again, if you've never done this, you don't know what you don't know. There's just so many moving parts with podcasting. I talked about on last week's episode, my first client. I landed him as a client because I addressed everything that he was going to encounter when he started his podcast, and he did not expect that. And that allowed me to work with him and handle a lot of those items for him. But that's the thing. If you don't know what you don't know, you can't go into this blindly and expect the greatest results ever. You're not entitled to the whole world showing up and listening to your podcast, nor am I. You've got to earn that trust, and you've got to earn that respect from your audience. And the only way you can do that is if you have a plan. So as I kick off these 4 mistakes that podcasters make that cost them years of growth, it would be so easy for me to say, number 1, they don't have a strategy. I mean, you're probably thinking that's where I'm going to go because this is what the show is about. This is what I do. This is what I talk about all the time. But the way I look at this is these 4 items that I decided to identify and key in on today, they're all part of the strategy. And if you're not thinking about these items in the very beginning, more than likely at some point, they are going to creep up on you and they are going to cause some damage. It could be something small that's easy to address, or it could be something that's irreparable. And it could be something that causes you to become disengaged with leveraging a podcast to grow your business. So we want to make sure that we address these things on the front end, and this is why in my strategy days, these items I'm going to talk about, these are things we talk about. These are the things that we should be focused on amongst many others, but it ultimately sets you up to understand what's going on with this medium, what you want to accomplish, and then how you're going to leverage podcasting to accomplish it. So let's start with the first mistake that cost podcasters years of growth, not having the proper mindset. I did an episode with one of my clients, and you can jump back and listen to it. It was episode 84. And we had talked about the strategy session that I put her and her co-hosts through. And she had mentioned to me how I brought up the mindset part as step 1. That was the first thing that we were going to talk about. And I say it like that because she came to the meeting, or actually all 3 of the co-hosts of this podcast came to the meeting so prepared, and they had such a clear vision. It was great. It was refreshing. And they did not have grandiose expectations of being the world's best podcast. She knows that she exists in a very niche industry where her content is only going to be applicable to a certain amount of people. But that certain amount of people can be a very great number depending on how you evaluate it. She said to me, I don't have any grand visions of being the next Joe Rogan. I don't want to have anything that size. I have information, knowledge, and a message that I want to bring to the world. And I want to bring this to life through a podcast. And I know that over time, I'm going to be able to develop this show. And as I get better at podcasting, more people are going to want to listen to me. I usually spend at least the first half hour talking about mindset, but she nailed it in one sentence. And I was just like, okay, well, I guess we're either going to finish early today or we can take a break already and have breakfast. It was so awesome to hear that that's where she was. But on the show where we were talking about this and recounting her experience, she asked why I did that first. And the reason why I talk about mindset first is because not a lot of people come to this like she did. They come at podcasting like it's this instant vortex into fame and fortune, and everything's going to just fall into place and start clicking like they always wanted because they start a podcast. And I don't know why that's the mentality. I don't know who has said that out loud for someone to hear, because it's freaking bullshit. This is just like any other content medium. It takes time, it takes attention. You have to get good at what you're doing. You have to understand what you're creating. You have to understand who you're talking to. And if your mindset is that I'm going to be the next Joe Rogan, well, I'm afraid I've got some bad news for you. You're not going to have a good time. Because for one, Joe Rogan's taken. You can't be the next Joe Rogan. You should focus on being the first you. And that's not just from a podcasting perspective. That's from that's for everything. Be you, be authentic, be yourself, be the one that changes the course of things in your particular industry. Don't worry about what friggin' Joe Rogan's doing this week. And to that point, I always say, listen, there's a number of ways to look at Joe Rogan's timeline. He's been doing podcasting in some respect for years. At first, he didn't have an audience. He was doing it in his basement with his friends. And he just kept going and going and going. And he was a stand-up comedian. He was on TV. He had outlets that let people know who he was. And that eventually landed him where he landed. Great. Good for Joe. I love Joe Rogan. I respect what he did in this space. But his timeline's like 20 years if you want to track it back to when he was just doing comedy in small nightclubs and just getting his start. Probably it's even longer than 20 years at this point. But he put in the work and he got there. So to come into this with a mindset that you're going to just achieve that overnight, that's just ignorant. And it's just absolutely wrong. And it's going to throw you off your game. This is why I address mindset first. Whenever I'm doing strategy with somebody, I want to make sure that their head isn't in the clouds. I want to make sure that they're not thinking on this level that is not attainable. Because what's going to happen is they're going to go into their content and I should say, before they even get to that part, I'm going to build a strategy for them and we're going to work on it together, and they're going to start producing content that in their mind, now that they have the strategy, this is absolutely real. They were already thinking they were going to be the next Joe Rogan, and now they've got a strategy that this is going to get them there even faster. And when it doesn't happen, they're going to come back to me and say, what the hell? I'm not that big. And like, well, no, you're not that big. I don't ever want to be in a position to where I have to have that conversation. I would rather have that conversation first and make sure you understand that you're not going to be that big, nor do you need to be. In 20 years, maybe we're having a different conversation. I would love to be proven wrong, and whatever you set out to do gets you to a Joe Rogan level. Great. That's friggin' awesome. I'm so happy that you accomplished that. But I'm going to be 66. Or I'm sorry, 66. Geez, I'm forgetting how old I am at this point when we have that conversation, right? Like, it's going to take time. And it's better to focus on what you can accomplish now. And if you're using podcasting for your business, which is why you're here listening to this show, you don't need to be as big as Joe Rogan. And you don't need to put in the time that Joe Rogan puts into these. You listen to a show, his episodes are like 2.5 to 3 hours long. I had great conversations, but yeah, if you're producing content like that, you can hang in the conversation. That means you're having some really in-depth conversations with people. But then you've got the time to produce that type of content. I mean, the struggles that have worked with people on where they're having trouble producing a half-hour episode a week just because time is so limited, to think that they want to get to a level where they were putting out three-hour conversations a week is fucking nuts. So let's look at mindset first. If you're not locked in to what's happening in the now, and you're not being realistic with who you are as a podcaster, and I'm not even saying like, maybe you don't even consider yourself a podcaster. You're just a business person that's using podcasting. That's fine too. But if you're not realistic about what you can accomplish based on the skills that you have, you're not going to have a good time with this. It's just going to become an anchor in your week. And you're going to go into it going, fuck, I got to make a podcast this week. And blah, 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 blah. You're going to run yourself into the ground. And believe me, that will then transfer over to the content that you create. People will be able to tell that your heart's not in it. That's the last thing you want, because when people hear that, they check out too. And it gives them a reason to go to another podcast. You want to make sure that you are dialed in with everything that you're doing, and that the subject matter that you are focusing on is just as you feel the same level of passion for it and delivering the message to your audience that you do on the 10th episode, the 20th episode, the 100th episode, as you did on day one, if not more so. The more you get invested in what you're doing, the better your mindset's going to be. But the better your mindset is from the start, the more invested you're going to be in the long-term gains that your podcast can bring you. So bad mindset will absolutely cost you growth. Come into this thinking the right way. The second thing that podcasters do that costs them years of growth is they don't identify a target listener or target viewer, target audience member, we'll call them. You've got to know who you're talking to. If your podcast is not dedicated to one specific person, then you are missing the boat. I know your name probably isn't George. Maybe it is. If your name's George, hi, Jason. Nice to meet you. But my target customer, target listener, target viewer is named George. And I built out a persona of everything that I want George to be. That's who I'm talking to. I always focus my content like I'm talking to one person. That person's George. I developed that years ago, and it was after I watched Seinfeld. So see how that connected. I could have called him Kramer. But nevertheless, George is the type of person who is looking to build his business, but he wants podcasting to play a role in it, and he needs to understand the tools to get him there. He has a small business. I believe I said that he had a product. I'm admittedly saying I haven't actually looked at my George avatar in a while, but I know that when I develop content, that's who I'm pushing it towards, because that's, in a lot of ways, it was me. When I got done building that avatar, I went, holy shit, this is basically me on the customer side. But that made the content easier to create, because now I know who I'm pointing it towards. I want George to absorb this content, and when he gets something from it, he can take action. Whether that action is to go apply the lesson that I teach within a podcast, or maybe he needs to take the next step. I need additional coaching. I need to get on a strategy call with Jason. I'm ready to make this buying decision and go full bore on my strategy. I know that as I develop content, that's where I'm trying to get my target listener. So if you start your podcast not thinking about who you're talking to, you're going to be talking into the void. I've talked to people in the past, want to start a podcast. Great. What are you thinking about with that? What would you like to talk about? Oh, I want to make it real variety. Like, let's talk about guns, and let's talk about religion and politics and sex. I'm like, holy shit. Like, you're talking like you're the freaking 11 o'clock news. Well, who are you appealing that towards? Well, everybody likes that stuff. And that's the mistake. If you're trying to talk to everybody, you're talking to nobody. You've got to determine who makes the most sense for you to deliver your message to, and then craft that message so that target person can get something from it. And then that target person will turn to another target person and say, hey, I know you've been looking for this type of information. This is right up your alley. This hit me so hard right in the mouth. You need to hear this too. And now your audience just went from 1 to 2 Georges. Exponential growth. 2 can become 4 when they turn to one other person apiece. That's how audience growth takes place. But if you're not focused on drilling your message into that one person, you can't get to where you have the audience size that truly supports the growth of your podcast. So before anything, and this is another thing within my strategy session and my strategy work, we are building out your customer, your listener, and I should say, if you're building this for your business, you're going to find a lot of parallels between your customer and your listener, because that's who you're supporting and that's who you want to support. So there's going to be a lot of things that you probably have already done to build a customer avatar. Building a listener viewer avatar is going to be pretty similar, but we identify a lot of key items that will make this person very clear in your mind, so you know exactly who you're talking to. So make sure that you are doing this. You are setting yourself up to speak to one person and then craft your message for them specifically. Okay, the third thing that costs podcasters years of growth is not developing a long-term content strategy. If you go back to last week's episode 106, I talked about building and growing a podcast, and the biggest mistake that gets made in regards to launching a podcast is throwing one episode out and seeing what happens. And if nothing happens, well, then you've got nothing to fall back on. You've got no content in the bank. You want to make sure that you have a long-term vision of where your content's going to go, but you also want to set yourself up in the very beginning to have content recorded so you can have a very successful launch that features more than one episode, but you also give yourself a little bit of a window to create new content and stay ahead of the schedule. If you're just trying to shotgun content out every week, that's going to show, and that's going to hurt the quality of the message. And if people start to pick up on that and it starts to become more of a thing, well, they're going to more than likely bail on your show because they're just not getting the impact that they once did. So you have to think about the long term of the content that you're building. So as I said on last week's episode, the statistic that scares the shit out of everybody is that most podcasts don't get past their 10th episode. Well, there's an easy fix for that. Before you ever go live with your podcast, record 11 episodes. You're already ahead of the game. Congratulations, you come out of the gates with a win. But you also want to look at what can you do to build content over time. So you've developed your avatar, you know who you're speaking to. Now you have to craft content for that specific person. And if it's built around what you're trying to accomplish within your business, it makes it much easier, because now you can give a lesson and you can direct somebody to what they need to do next. So they get some knowledge, and if you really want them to take action, you give them one specific call to action, and that's what they need to do. Now, they may not do it on this week's episode, but they might go back and listen to the last 4 episodes. And if the call to action is parallel and it's the same, okay, well, now this is beat into my head that this is what I need to do now. So you make it easy for the journey of that person that listens to your show, but you have to think for your content, how can you continue to build out content over time? Here's a simple exercise that I've been doing for years, and I'm actually so far ahead now because I sat down one day. I was doing some research for a presentation that I'm giving at the Empowered Podcasting Conference, and I had gotten some feedback, and I started looking like all of these things that I just got as feedback from ChatGPT could actually be great podcast episodes. So I wrote them all down. So like instantly I had 15 new episode ideas, which is going to cover me for a few months at a minimum. So the exercise that I normally do is once a week. It's because I'm a once a week show. Now, and when I say that, I actually do 2 episodes a week, but I have 2 separate parameters. I have my 5-minute question and answer episodes that I do on Mondays. I have a separate column for that. In that column, I think I have over 60 questions lined up. And that's not counting if I get any questions from listeners and viewers like you that want to have your question featured on the show. If you want to do that, just go to the SpeakPipe link in the show notes and you can submit your question. But I have all of those lined up. And then I have all of my Thursday episodes that are a little longer and more detailed. I have all of those lined up. But what I normally do, and I'll pick this back up because I like to stay ahead, is every Thursday when I launch a new episode, I'll take maybe 15 to 20 minutes, and I'll just brainstorm 3 new episode topics, and then I'll put them on my list. So every week, I'm adding 3 new ideas. So one goes out, 3 new get added. The next week, one goes out, 3 new get added. I am so far ahead that I could realistically take some time off and it would not hurt. So you do that exercise based on the frequency of how much you put out content. If you are putting out 1 episode a week, maybe do 2 to 3. Like I said, I do 3, you could do 2, and you're still staying ahead in regards to topic ideas. I like 3 because having more content ideas, well, the more the merrier, because eventually you're going to record this and you're going to need it. And if it's an idea that works, get it out of your head and get it down on paper so you don't forget about it. But I do that every week. And if you do let's say you do a bi-weekly podcast, I always do this on release day because that's usually the day that I'm thinking more about my show or thinking most about my show. So I will take a minute to do that exercise. If you do a bi-weekly show, maybe do 2 episodes in your exercise. 1 goes out, 2 goes into the list, but you're already way ahead of the game. So it's little things like that that will allow you to continue developing the content strategy over time. But if you start at the beginning knowing exactly where you want to go with it, and then set yourself up for maybe you have 15 to 20 content ideas before you ever go live, and you've already recorded 10, or I should say 11. That way you beat that statistic, but you've got a clear pathway. You know where you're going. And if you don't know where it's going, you get to a point where you're just trying to whip something together for the sake of putting a podcast out that week. And that doesn't serve anybody. And over time, that's the shit that's going to drag you down. That's the shit that's going to lead to burnout, because you're not thinking about this on a long-term strategy. You're thinking about it on a short term of what can I do to get something out this week? And what will inevitably happen is eventually you get to a point where you just start to say, well, I just can't think of anything this week. I'm not going to do a show. And then that can compound into 2 weeks go by and 3 weeks go by. And all of a sudden it's been a month and we haven't done a freaking podcast. Well, by then your audience has probably wondered where the hell you went, and they maybe have bailed and they've worked a new show into their rotation because you didn't have anything new for them. Or if they do come back and give you a second chance, you probably won't get any more after that. So I'm not saying that we're all perfect here. We've all had weeks where we've missed content, but if you have this podcasting content strategy built in the very beginning, you can avoid this landmine, and you can make sure that you're set up for years of growth. Make sure you're set up for years of positive energy and consistent value being brought to your audience. And again, this all comes down to how you are putting the content out, because maybe you aren't doing a weekly show. Maybe you're not doing a bi-weekly show. Maybe you're doing a series. Maybe you're doing a season's worth of content. Maybe you're doing something else. And because again, there's a number of different formats. Depends on what works best to serve your business. But overall, you have to make sure that you have a content strategy, or else your show is going to fall flat. And when you start whipping content together, believe me, this does not become fun. That doesn't make it any better. And you might be able to pull it off a couple times, but for the long haul, it's going to eventually catch up to you. So make sure that your content strategy is sound and that you are ready to rock from day one when you launch your podcast. Okay, and the fourth item that costs podcasters years of growth is not focusing on podcast SEO from the start. Yours truly is the ultimate example of this. And if you've listened to past episodes, you've heard me talk about the rebrand of this podcast. It was known as Let's Blow This Up. I rebranded it to Podcasting Strategy Simplified in early 2026. The reason I did that is the former name was an extension of my brand, Bombtrack Media, but it was not telling you what you would experience on the podcast. That cost me growth. That cost me visibility. And I realized that, which is why I made the pivot. You have to think about these items in the very beginning. And I've said it. I've told this story on past episodes. I was so locked in to the brand strategy that I didn't think about the podcast strategy, at least in regards to the name. I knew what I wanted to do with it in regards to content. And I guess, even to a small degree, that lacked, because I know that in the very beginning, in the first season, I made some connections with some of my people here in Pittsburgh and a couple other friends that I have in the business world, and they weren't all about podcasting. I did a couple episodes about podcasting, but even those episodes they were good in regards to the actual surface content, but like, were they podcasting strategy? No. And it took me a minute to get to where we are today, where it's dialed in. So I will fully admit my mistakes in that respect. But looking back on it, I don't think anybody would have been able to convince me otherwise about the name. I was so excited about that name because to give you the full story, I spent probably 3 months brainstorming when I was my business was formerly known as Sircone Consulting. I wanted something with more impact that just sounded better. I was bored with my own name and I just wasn't feeling it. And I ended up spending 3 months in the process of rebranding, thanks to my friend Alexandra Watkins. Her book, Hello, My Name is Awesome, was my guide to get me in the right place with my brand name. And I read the book cover to cover and then went through it again and utilized the lessons. Bombtrack Media came to me while I was on the treadmill at the gym. I was listening to my mix and a Rage Against the Machine song came on, and it just said, oh my God, yeah, that sounds really cool. And I started thinking about it, and when I looked it up, there's only a couple companies not adjacent to me that have that name. Yeah, I consulted with an attorney. They said, run with it. It's great. Everything fell into place. But like, I remember after landing on Bombtrack Media, it was almost instantly that I came up with, let's blow this up, will be my new podcast, because I knew with this rebrand, I was going to do a new podcast. And like I said, I was so jazzed about that name. I still love the name. Don't get me wrong. If it worked for what I needed to work for, I would still have that name. But I was so bought in because of the brand extension that it fit so perfectly. The compliment was, you just couldn't see past it. It was just right there. I had to do it. But I learned that people looking for podcasting strategy and how to be a better podcaster, marketing, you name it, like all the things that I would normally work with somebody on, they can't learn that from Let's Blow This Up. So you have to think about the podcast SEO part first. And I should say, that's even if it was discovered. The SEO part of podcasting is what helps your show get discovered. So my show, despite being about podcasting and me trying to shoehorn taglines into that title, like Let's Blow This Up, the world's #1 podcasting podcast, or whatever the hell I did, it didn't work. And I suffered because of it. Not suffered. I mean, I had built my audience, but it took more legwork, and it wasn't as big as it could have been because I didn't have that natural discoverability on my side. So I had to rebrand, and that's helped. If you go now and if you search for podcasting or podcasting strategy, because the keywords are right there and it's the first 2 words of the title, of course it's going to pop up. So now I'm ranking and I'm up there with some of the best podcasts about podcasting. My show has become discoverable. So the lesson here, and this is something you can apply to your practices, is that direct is way better than cute and clever. And I felt that the cute and clever route was better because it complemented my brand. And I should have been thinking about what's it going to do to get positioned for discovery so people can find my show and then ultimately listen to the show. I accepted that I made a mistake in that respect, but I made the pivot. And I will say that I know I did a lot of research. I want to say a lot, enough. My biggest thing that helped me get this show going the right way is I had a lot of conversations with people, because I did it around the time of PodFest 2026. I was in Orlando. I was around other podcasters. I was picking the brains of many people, and I was very surprised to hear how many people had that same conversation with themselves, or they had actually gone through it themselves. They rebranded their show. As daunting of a task as it seemed, they felt that changing course led them to a better destination, or got them pointed towards a better destination. And that was enough to tell me I need to do this. And I did. And there's no shame in making that change if you're in a position where you're struggling, or if you're looking at it like this daunting task. I will point you right now to my 90-minute coaching modules. I have Podcast Rebranding Simplified, and we can work together on getting your show set up so you have a seamless pivot and you can get pointed the right way. But overall, if you're in the beginning phases of this, I can say that if you're not set up from an SEO perspective for your podcast to get discovered, you are going to cost yourself growth, because people simply can't find you. And if you don't have that organic visibility on your side, you're either going to have to spend a lot more in regards to ads and things that are going to get you discovered from a paid perspective, or you're just going to have to do a lot more legwork with word of mouth and social posting. And you know how hard that is these days because social media is all about the ads now. So organic discovery, I'm at a point now where my shorts are going to be on YouTube, and that's pretty much where it's at. I'm not using them as reels. I'm more in a position of I want to build this podcast to be the focal point. And if I'm just trying to spread reels everywhere, it just doesn't work. It's just becoming so hard. It works if you do it right with a paid strategy behind it. That's the way I'm seeing it these days. And I want to start doing more with that. But overall, I'm getting slightly away from the point here. But I do want to say that be direct, set up your show with a name, a title that's going to let people know what they're going to experience, because that's step one in the process. Once they see the show name plus the episode cover, if it appeals to them when they're doing a search for a podcast, now they can click on it. Now you want your show description to explain to them exactly what they're going to experience, and you want to do it as succinctly as possible. You don't want to have this long book, but you want to have some keywords in that show description. You want to put a couple questions in there that people might type into that search engine as they're looking for shows. And once you've got those items in place, now, as I've said on past episodes, this is the invitation to the party. You've given them all the reasons why they should be coming in and checking out what you have to offer. And if you do these items in a very powerful way, now they press play and your content's the party. Now they can listen to the dance mix. They can experience all the other people that are there. They can hear the reason why they came in, and they can be satiated, and it validates why they press play. Okay, this was everything I wanted. And I should say I skipped one thing, and I apologize. I will say this. Make sure you have attention-grabbing episode titles versus just saying episode 106 with Bill Jones. You want to make sure that you have something that when somebody says, okay, this looks good, like 4 mistakes that cost podcasters years of growth. That's what I've delivered to you today. Now, thank you for being a part of this party. I welcome you to come back to future parties. Be direct. Don't worry about being cute. You may feel like you're going to get more from that, but I'm telling you from an SEO perspective, setting yourself up to be discovered, that's going to be the winning ticket. So, in summary, not addressing mindset, not identifying your target listener, not building a long-term strategy, and not focusing on SEO. Those are just 4 mistakes that podcasters make that cost them years of growth. What's something that you've experienced that's cost you years of growth? Send me an email at jason@bombtrackmedia.com. Let me know what you discovered was something that you were doing that you said, man, once I figured this out and I got past it, I started to really feel things kick into gear. I'd love to hear your perspective. So shoot me an email and let me know what you've experienced that's cost you growth in the past. And with that, we're going to bring the curtain down on episode 108 of Podcasting Strategy Simplified. I hope you had a great time. I know I did. Until our paths cross again on the next episode, my name is Jason Sircone, reminding you that podcasting isn't easy, but it doesn't need to be complicated. I'll see you next time.